Welcome to the Be Student Podcast, and thank you for joining me. I'm so excited to have with me today Addison, our Chief Marketing Officer at the Winter Park Chamber of Commerce, who was my guest last month, and we talked about Gen X and Gen Z and how to navigate through and across the generations at the workplace. And as it turns out, thousands of people tuned in. I've had comments from lots of people saying to me that was such a relevant conversation. I wish I knew how to cut across these lines better. So today I've brought Addie back and we are going to continue this discussion because it's so relevant and it's something that we get feedback that people say, I just don't know how all this is supposed to work. What does this look like? So we hope that this will be fun, maybe a little bit funny. We definitely don't want to poke fun at anybody. The spirit of this is collaboration and understanding, but we want to be curious about this because curiosity is going to be the thing that enables the next part of our workplace. And as AI rolls into town, it can't understand the nuances that cut across generations. So we want to equip you all to be the human in the room to understand some of these subtle differences that exist between generations. So Addie, welcome back. I'm glad that we could be together today talking about this.
Thanks for having me back, Betsy. I love talking about this and helping everyone understand that there are a lot more opportunities for collaboration rather than clashing when it comes to working across the generations.
And I think one of the cheat codes we have is that we use humor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, you know, I don't want to be saying, oh, this generation's got it all wrong and mine's got it all right. I think there are values and strengths from each that when we think through them more strategically and maybe with a little bit of humor, we can do better with that. What are some of the ways that you catch me maybe being a Gen Xer and that you have to kind of tease me about stuff?
Well, I think one of them is anytime I always joke around you opening a PDF. So I know that
Wait, this is too good.
Yes.
Me opening a PDF. Describe this. What happens?
It is how do I open this? What folder is this? That I know is a joke across my peers and my group is how are these people leading companies when they cannot open an email
PDF.
attachment? That we go, I can't wait to get to the point where I'm so good in my career that it doesn't matter if I can open a PDF or not because the other skills I'm bringing are so valuable.
Well, and then the sad part is we're like, we don't need to know how to PDF, open a PDF because we have people who do that for us, which is terrible. But it's funny because we actually, I think we're hearing now that people aren't using their brains anymore because they're just using ChatGPT to generate stuff. I think at the office, we don't use our brains when it comes to technology because if you're smart enough, you have young people in the office to do that for you. So I think that's a bad strategy, but it's definitely like, oh, and I genuinely feel a sense of anxiety when there isn't a young person at the office to help us with something. Do you know that?
Yes. It's if you have a 20 at the beginning of your age, you are a default tech expert in whatever office you work in. It was when I first started, it was an expectation that I knew all of these technical things. And I was like, why does everyone think I know this? And they're like, you're 20. And I was like, okay. And so I've passed that baton on a little bit, but it is there of if you are in your 20s, it's assumed you know how to use a computer.
So let's take it to the underground. What do you guys say? This is a safe place. What do you say amongst your friends about that? Are people annoyed by that? Or they're 20-somethings that are like, I'm tired of everyone thinking I'm good at tech just because I'm 20-something? Or do people feel proud of that? What is that like on the other side?
I think it can depend on the day. Of that can be your final straw of if everything in the day has been going wrong and somebody said, and you're like, why can't they open this document? But it's also one that it shows that level of value of sometimes you're not at the C-suite level yet, but there's ways that you can deliver value to your boss, to your boss's boss, whenever you have that competency and are able to show up in that place that we know can be an area of high anxiety. No matter how many times I do a test check in an event, I'm worried it's going to go wrong because there's so many different systems communicating to each other. So that anxiety never leaves, but being the person who has that answer, who has that magic ticket to make the PowerPoint show up on the screen can be essential to differentiating yourself.
Right. And that you want that person around more and more and more. So I'll use a great example. We have a political committee at the chamber. And we started putting together messaging and things to support our candidate 2 years ago. And I remember in the first meeting, we hadn't invited you because it was a very high-level strategy meeting amongst the PAC board and the CEO and board chair. And we didn't even think to invite you. And in the middle of that meeting, I was like, well, let me go grab Addie really quick. And that grew into, let me grab her again next week when we met again. And then it turned into, do not schedule this without Addie being part of it. Do you remember that process?
I do.
What did that feel like for you?
For me, it was very empowering to be invited into those rooms. But part of that is because I differentiated what made me indispensable. So that's really a hack that people can use of if you have those fundamental technical skills that make something work, that can be your ticket into the room that you might not have that initial invite to.
So let's talk about one of my a little bit Gen Z annoyances. And I think I'm pretty typical in this. There's a perception that some Gen Z people, and I don't want to say all, but some, and a predominant perception, that Gen Zers believe they should be in the C-suite from the day they graduate from college. They deserve to be there. They're smart enough. They know how to open a PDF. Why can't I be in the C-suite, right? So that's one of my pet peeves because there is a rare air kind of thing that only comes through the way you can't make wine age fast, right? And so there's a sense of the nuance and the layered navigation around difficult, complex, really people moments that people in executive roles need to manage, that young people just haven't had the lived experience yet of that. And I mean, I'll be honest. I think a lot of people my age feel this. We feel offended when young people believe that they think they should be in the same place that we have when they haven't tolerated some moron boss yet or gone through some corporate nonsense that we all had to live through, or for the love of God, pantyhose, right? Like no one had to go through 10 years of pantyhose like I did to get to this place. So, that is one of the criticisms I would have about some of the thinking in that generation. Talk to me about what your counter to that would be. How do you perceive that? And what are your thoughts about that? Because I hear you saying, I'm here trying to find a way to make myself indispensable to my direct report. And I wonder if young people are thinking like that.
Well, I think a lot of it comes to the expectation reset when you're joining the workforce straight out of college.
Right.
So with it, it's the natural cycle of when you leave middle school, you're the top dog, you're the 8th grader, you go to high school and your ego's checked because you're a freshman again. You have to put in the work to become the senior. That cycle restarts when you go to college. It restarts when you come into the job market.
Yep.
You are now the freshman who has to pay their dues before you can make varsity.
Yep.
So you have to look at what that reset is, and it's an ego check. So I had to do that whenever I graduated with my master's.
So let's pause for just a second. Ego check. What do you mean when you say that? Because we have people that are like, why do I need to check my ego? I'm really good at tech, or I'm a great coder, or I'm whatever it might be. Why do I need to check my ego? Tell them why.
So with it of you're coming into a new environment, your real job is to listen and learn, not be the leader yet. And with that of I graduated with a master's and I had worked, interned throughout, but I did not have that I'm not in school, I'm not still learning stage of my career yet. It was coming into that first real full-time job when school is fully behind me. I had a master's degree, so I was like, I should have this amazing title because I've put in all this
and
work.
An amazing rate of pay that goes with it. Yep.
And then I had to go, actually, no. I do need that lower title because I need to learn this new environment. I need to come in at the entry level because I'm the freshman again. And that was a big ego blow and one that it stung, but it also had to face reality of this is where I need to get my foot in the door. This is where I need to start because I'm the freshman again. And it never feels good to have that. And you hear these incredible stories of people coming in, of they graduated and they were immediately promoted to founder. That isn't a possible track because how can you be immediately promoted to that? But in that, of you hear these great stories. To me, I go back to when you come into a theater department as a freshman, the freshman who gets cast as the lead above all the seniors. And it's a huge shakeup. It's a huge drama point. But That's a 1 in a million story.
Yep.
Majority of freshmen have to put in their dues in the ensemble before senior year. They might get the lead.
Yep.
And so with that, it is putting in the reps, putting in the practice so that you're ready to go to each new stage. But your ego's blown up in college. You're leaving senior. You're having
Your
your
top
senior
dog.
year. You
Yep.
think everything, the world is your oyster, and it is in a lot of ways, but you have to restart as that grain of sand before you're the pearl in the organization that you're at.
So I love that imagery because a grain of sand is so tiny compared to the pearl, which is so lustrous and beautiful as a result. But the reality is that many young people aren't approaching how to show up in the workplace with that level of curiosity. So we've talked a little bit on this podcast about curiosity as a superpower. And one of the things we're noticing is a crisis of curiosity in that so far as people are reading less, we know that the consumption of books is way, way, way down. And we, are hearing more and more about people not feeling connected to things. So having a spirit of curiosity to understand the system that you're walking into and feeling connected to it and feeling that you're serving it could be a key to that. And you saying, first, I'm going to listen. First, I'm going to learn, right? And somebody very, very wise told me in my 20s, you should think about your career as years in high school. Your 20s are your freshman year, your 30s are your sophomore year, your 40s are your junior year, and your 50s are your senior year. And it's interesting because anyone who's lived through the high school years know that they know more as a senior than they did as a freshman. And so I think for listeners, I know many of our listeners are in their 20s and are young and are thinking, well, how come it's not working out for me in the executive suite yet? Think about that through a spirit of inquiry and curiosity, and also through that lens of, well, what did you know in your freshman year, right? And start to figure out how to, and maybe what you did was if you were lucky enough to be on the varsity basketball team at age in ninth grade, well, then maybe you sucked up to some of the older players or to the coaches so that you could be seen as valuable. So I think the irony of your story is that approaching things from a listening first, curiosity first mindset helped you zoom right up the ranks, because within 2 years, you went from coordinator to manager, director to CMO. So tell us about that story. And I will tell you, much of that was enabled by the good judgment that you've used in every one of those roles. No one's going to be ready to put somebody into an elevated role if they don't think that person has good judgment, because elevation means you've got so much more supervisory responsibility. And if you don't have good judgment, you can't supervise well and you become a liability for the company. So I think that's one of the most important things for our young people to think about is, in what way am I showing up and proving to my direct report or my leader that I do have good judgment? And you did that consistently and without fail. And that was part of your weaponization of how you approach the work. Tell us about that.
Well, one thing I'd like to say is that because I do now have the CMO title, I'm in the executive suite of what would be considered our organization. That title comes with a lot of responsibility. It's not just a pretty title for my LinkedIn. And part of it, too, is that I was really nervous to take on this title because I understood the weight of what that meant. Decision-making comes down to me. That when something goes wrong, I have to look at you and say, this was my call. When someone on my team comes and says, we have a problem, I am the one who's the weight of that decision falls to. And a lot of that promotion is that I was ready and proved that I could make good judgment calls in those spaces. But it also keeps me up at night. It is not a dream title just because I have those words. It also comes with the work and responsibility of that title. And when I think about what my work-life balance is, it keeps me up at night. Am I making the right choices? Am I doing the responsible thing for my team members? And those choices have to impact how I build my life. So part of that desire to have that accelerated title is you want the flashy title, but do you want the work that comes along with it? Do you want the responsibility that's going to allow you to keep that title? The first person I was in charge of supervising was an intern. and I take the interns very seriously, but that was a safe space to learn and fail as a supervisor, but grow those muscles and become better, that when I started managing a part-time team member, a full-time team member, a whole team, that I was ready to take those incremental steps and grow. I'd put in the reps that allowed me to be able to step into this role successfully. But if I hadn't done those reps and given myself time to fail and take coaching, I would never be ready for this title.
And I'm going to make a plug for the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, where he lays out to master something, you've got to do it for 10,000 hours. And many people know the Beatles as the kind of flawless, iconic music group that they were, but they got their reps in playing small venues across Europe in the 50s. So they were playing small venues in Germany to become the megawatt superpowers that they were in the 60s and 70s. And so that taking reps, thinking about how you can be indispensable, take the reps, do something small so that you can do something big, exercise your judgment muscle and your curiosity muscles. And those are because, again, you're being kept up at night, not because of opening PDFs. You're being kept up at night because you're thinking about the downside of what if we don't do this? What's the downside? Or what if we do this, right? And that's where that judgment muscle comes in. Let me tell you a stat that I heard last week that you already know that I want to talk about on this podcast. 6% of respondents in the Gen Z cohort of a recent workforce study said that it is part of their career plan or goal to have a leadership role. 6%. Now, I would be willing to say that they respond like that because they want work-life balance. They want to be left alone at night. They want to be left alone on the weekend. They want to clock in and clock out. Clock in and clock out roles are usually lower paid roles. They're not the kind of roles that you are kept up at night to do. I think there is a concern about who is going to be taking on leadership roles if Gen Z says, not for me. How does that statistic hit you? And what do you think of when you hear me say that? Because you have illustrated why many people wouldn't want those roles. In my generation, we finished college and we wanted to be moving up that coordinator, manager, director, VP, C-suite chain as soon as possible. What you did back then was you joined a company and you stayed with it for life. So moving up through that chain was very important. And it was a very hierarchical experience. And we didn't question it. It's more fluid now. And also people are less loyal. We'll talk about that in a minute too. But talk about that process of what are we going to do when 94% of people who are in their 20s don't want to be leaders of organizations? How are we going to handle that?
Well, I'm actually not shocked by the statistic from talking to my peers of what they are looking for out of the roles that they are in. A lot of them are looking for the role that they can clock in and out of, that they know what their task is every day, they finish it so that they can go on to doing something else in their off hours. There is a big problem because we're going to have to eventually fill those roles, that there will need to be leaders within organizations, that we need to create a stronger on-ramp for them to feel comfortable to take those spots. I think part of it is they might not be seeing excellent managers and leaders modeled to them. And if you don't see it, you can't be it.
Right.
And also that the track of, I think there's a disillusionment that track really exists anymore, that you stay with a company for decades and that you would naturally move up. Unless you are in one of the really corporate structures that has that in place, most businesses aren't operating like that anymore, that people aren't seeing that if I stay here for 10 years, I'm going to be rewarded. So why would I?
So my counter to that would be, we all know that the AI revolution is here. We don't fully understand what it's going to be like when it's fully in place or optimized or whatever. But I've heard other people speak about the critical skills young people need to be acquiring now are not tech skills. They're not open this PDF. They're not task-based things because the AI will now take over and do the task-based things. So the critical question is, if there's a cohort of young people who want to do task-based things and go home, and there's now technology that's going to be replacing that, what remains? What remains is we've got to be curious, we've got to be curatorial, and we've got to have good judgment, right? And so these are the muscles that for our young listeners, I hope you're hearing, need to start getting developed. We need to start practicing good judgment. And again, it takes good leaders in place, as you say, to model that. You've got to have leaders that can say, it's okay to fail. I need you to try something and be willing to fail because that's how you're going to flex your good judgment muscle, right? Let's think about how we're going to flex your curiosity muscle. Let's think about the human part of this that we have to show up with and become indispensable as humans, because showing up to work and just doing task-based delivery is soon going to be supplanted by quantum computing. So when we think about tips and tricks for people to start thinking about, I think people need to be thinking in these categories of how can I make myself more ready to receive feedback and create opportunities for me to practice these skills, practice the skill of using good judgment, of having a problem set, going to your leader and saying, here's the problem set, here are the available options. You always come to me with 2 options. And I may not always like what you pick, but I usually pick it because you've given me a list of reasons why it's the better option. Oftentimes, I will have a different idea in mind and you will convince me. And that's how you become indispensable to your leader, right? So I think that young people listening, or even people who could supersize their people skills, which we all need to do now in order to get ready for what's hitting us with quantum computing. Tell us about how that sounds to you. What does that feel like? Because we've heard Gen Z is too precious and that they don't want to receive feedback, right? So tell me a little bit about how all that sounds to you.
Well, I'm actually thinking about a podcast that I was watching the other day that was talking about titles in corporate America. And majority of promotional titles involve managing people. So it's manager implies that you're managing people now. Director, larger people, CEO, larger there. And they were talking about how can we shake up the traditional title and promotional ladder that people are on that doesn't necessarily mean that you're managing more people. And I thought it was really interesting. So I'm going to kind of throw this back at you with another question of, you're in a position where you get to create what people's job titles are, that in our organization, we can craft how people are promoted, how they grow their career. And traditionally, that's based around people, not necessarily responsibilities or outputs. So what might be also 2 more creative ways that we could change how we promote people, how we recognize what people's work is, that's not necessarily always tied to the people that they're in charge of.
So tell us more about that.
So instead of just saying, great, now you're in charge of these 3 people, you're going to have the manager title. Does the manager title now revolve around you're in charge of these 3 AI softwares and their execution at our company? They're not necessarily around the people that they're managing, but it's the softwares and responsibilities that they are in charge of. So that if somebody's path is not around people, because not everyone's a great people leader, they might be a great project manager when it comes to the actual tasks, softwares, execution, but they're not around people. So are there other incentives that we can give people to give that recognition in that career progression that aren't always tied to people?
So let's talk about this for a minute, because I know that Gen Z, the cohort of Gen Z, wants to be compensated and recognized differently than my generation, which is Gen X. I always found, I worked for a Fortune 50 company, and I always found the way they recognized us to be super disingenuous, super self-serving, and very like, hey, there was almost like there was no there. They would give you like this weird gold pen when you hit your 5-year anniversary, and it felt something like what my grandfather would use. And I was like, why are you giving me this gold pen as a 25-year-old woman or 26-year-old woman? I don't want this. And it just feels desperately out of sync. And I think those kinds of practices have been upended, right? And that you're supposed to want a gold pen for staying with a company for 5 years. I think thinking about what the different generations want as compensation is different, right? And I think that we've seen that Gen Z is willing to forego money for other forms of compensation. Talk to me about what some of those might be and how people who are maybe more senior can learn a hack from you about how they could be approaching compensation differently. I know for me, I work for a small community nonprofit with a small budget. We can't lead with money as our primary form of compensation. So we lead with flexible work schedules, and we lead with a people first, employees second culture and ethos. And we make sure that we do little pieces of spot recognition, like maybe a Amazon gift card or a bonus at Christmas. Or I know one of the things that I'm most proud of is our staff holiday party. We do a favorite things gift exchange, and it's become like I wouldn't say it's a form of compensation per se, but it is one of the perks of working in our organization that we all love. And I've had to be more intentional about how I lead with some of those tools because I don't have money, strictly money, as the tool that I can compensate with. I try to do other things around holidays and certain things that are just non-monetary things we can do to promote a better workplace. And that seems to have been received well by our younger people on the team particularly. Talk about some of those different compensation methodologies.
I think flexible hours is one of the strongest non-monetary compensation that you can offer young people, that they're looking for a much fuller life that isn't necessarily, they might not be at the stage where they have a family of their own yet, but their friends or their community, that they're able to engage, show up for the people that are important to them in their lives. They're able to engage in hobbies, whether that is the workout class that they love to go to at 5 p.m. because that's where they have their people, of making sure that they can get out at 5:45 so that they could go to that. That means that you come in a little bit earlier for that flexibility, but you're able to prioritize those things that make your life meaningful to you.
So let's talk about that in the theater of you and me really quick.
Mm-hmm.
You will literally get up and say, I've got to go to my Pilates class and tell me this meeting's done, right? Like some people my age would be like, I'm not listening to that. There's no way I'm putting up with that. But I know that when you do, I'm compensating you. And so I'll say, all right, let's talk afterwards. So we might have a call at 6 o'clock, or we might have to wrap something up at 6 o'clock. But I know letting you go to that is part of what keeps you at the chamber. And I need you there. And you're very, very smart and very capable. And I get congratulated all the time about having you on our team. And also know they can't steal you or poach you. But I know when I'm doing that, I'm not having my hierarchy insulted. I'm not having my seniority insulted. I'm having that moment where I can reaffirm, I see you. I see what matters to you. And I'm going to check in with you later so you can go do this thing that's important to you. And we can have a call after hours and figure this out. And sometimes I do a lot of calls. Sometimes I'll meet employees in the morning at 7 o'clock and go for a walk with them so they can have some expanded thinking time with me. But just thinking differently about the hours and the conditions of the workplace. I'm still a believer in that there's a lot of times through the week we all do need to be in the office and be together, but I'm not going to chain everybody to a desk for 40 hours a week. Talk about what that's been like for you to say, I mean, in my generation, you would never get up from a meeting with your leader and say, I'm going to Pilates. That would be the kiss of death. You would be fired. Yes. So talk about the first time you did that and how you thought it was going to go.
Well, that's the key too, is good judgment and trust. That's not something I did the first week of work. Okay, that is not how I came out of the gate. That's an
important thing for people to hear.
And so it was one of, I built that first year of my employment on your team where I was in the office 9 to 5. You always knew that I was there, reliable, showing up when you needed, and there weren't late products, there weren't missed deliverables, that there was an extreme level of trust that later on as our relationship evolved, and we got to know each other more on a personal level, we're reporting more directly to each other, that we were able to share what those important things are, that I know what's on your calendar, that when you say, hey, I've got this, I can't be late to it, I know that I'm going to make sure that you're out on time so that you can reach that, and you now show that same level of respect back to me. But it wasn't an immediate, hey, first week of work, I've got Pilates at 5, let's go. And also, I'm very smart. That's something that I control, of very rarely do I schedule one of those while I know we have another commitment, because I try to reduce that. I don't like to be that kind of person who does it. But every now and then a meeting gets added to our calendar that we're not expecting. I've already got something set up. So I go, hey, I've got this out. I've got a heart out here, but call me afterwards and we'll make sure that everything that needs to be done is done.
And it is.
Because we built that trust. So that's also what I would advise to young people is that can be a goal of yours, is that long-term you build that relationship and that trust that you can have that flexibility. But you have to build that credibility before you can ask for it.
Yep. And I think a lot of people who respond to surveys, who are in a cohort of Gen Z, will say, well, how come I can't go to Pilates at 5 and just pick up from a meeting with my direct report and go do that? Well, the reality is it didn't take you 10 years to get to be to the place where you get up and go to Pilates. It took you 3. And you accelerated that path because you showed good judgment and you showed respect for the culture that I know that I can count on you. You didn't miss a deliverable. I never wait on work for you. I never chase work from you. And so, you know, when you want to work remotely for a couple of days, I have no problem with that because I know how to get you. And, you know, as a leader, I say, as long as I can get you, I don't care where you are, really. So I think it's a two-way street, but I also feel like there's a perception that you know, we owe young people this optimized workplace when, quite frankly, they're still in their freshman year. They haven't earned their varsity letter jacket yet, right? And so there needs to be an understanding on both sides of this. But I think we've got to be willing to receive feedback. Another way is don't look at a performance review as a criticism. This is a time where you can have that. We've had these dialogues in your performance review and in discussions around performance. Here's what I think performance could look like. And we've had these conversations. So we're able to do better with that. We know that Gen Z has a reputation for being too precious to receive feedback. But, you know, one of my great mentors told me feedback is a gift. So if you can be in a feedback loop with your leader and open up these kinds of conversations, like what does compensation look like to me? Because we can't assume that it all looks the same that it did for me in the early 90s, right? We have to evolve and we have to be prescriptive about how to approach it differently than just with money.
Yeah, I use your 3C method for myself. And also I've used it to advise my friends when they're looking to make a career move. Would you share what that is? I think it's an extremely useful framework, not only for an employee for deciding what type of job they want to take, but for a leader to understand what they have to offer their team.
So the 3 C's are control, content, and compensation. And there are 3 ways to think about what drives value for you and your career choices. And my general guidance is for people to pick 2. It's very rare that you're going to get all 3, but you might. I have all 3 right now, and I'm really happy that I have all 3. But I've also experienced prioritization of different C's through different chapters of my career. So in my first iteration of a career after college, I really wanted to work for a nonprofit, but my mom said, don't go work for a nonprofit right away, work for a Fortune 50, and then you can go work for a nonprofit later. But I wanted that corporate expression to be something meaningful. And I was fortunate that in the 90s, I was able to be part of delivering groundbreaking technology that revolutionized HIV care. And I did that through a major global pharmaceutical company. So yes, there was a profit motivation, but we were doing transformational work in the landscape of infectious diseases. And it was really great. But it mattered to me what I did, what I sold. That content piece was super important to me. And then when I had children, control became the most important driver. Being able to pick them up at 3:00 from school was the most important thing to me of all. And now here I am in my 50s. I've got to save for retirement. Compensation becomes the most valuable driver. So we've got to understand that we can give people value through one of these 3 lenses. And when we do, we might be able to get talent we couldn't even possibly afford if we weren't delivering control or content. So I think that's the explanation.
Yeah.
All
and
right.
it's one of that also can change year to year for someone, especially when someone's at the beginning stages of their career. So when I joined the chamber, really it was content and compensation were drivers for me there. I gave up control. I was working overtime. I was working through some weekends, not even necessarily because I was asked, but because I was trying to make sure that I was building that reputation in the organization that these things could get done. But as I've shifted, even last year, control became more of a priority for me because I wanted to invest in some of my hobbies. I joined a community choir. That was something that was really important to me. So that's something now where I know that's my list of my priorities. So I actually did this about 3 months ago, and I made a list of the things outside of work that were important to me, of where I said, these commitments I'm not going to waver on. These other ones, if they happen great. But I'm going to say it's okay because I need to control is not something I have right now in my driver because of different projects that we're taking on. So I said, these are the two things I know I'm always going to show up for, which are my fitness classes and my choir. And my other commitments, if I can make it to them, fantastic. If not, that's okay. So I know where I'm going to flex that control part of it. But the other ones I'll let go to make sure that I'm showing up where I need to in my career.
And as your employer, I'd say I benefit from you doing both of those things with a
Mm-hmm.
prioritization because you show up fresher to work and to handling some of the stress of what we do. All right. Well, this conversation was great today. We're going to keep doing this. We're going to keep talking about how we navigate across these generational lines. And if you're one of the thousands of people that's going to be joining us for this episode and you're new to this podcast, we would love it if you would like, share, and subscribe to the Be Student Podcast. We appreciate you joining us today for this critical conversation about navigating across generational lines. Addison Kersey, Chief Marketing Officer at the Winter Park Chamber, thank you for being with us today. We hope to see you next time on the Be Student Podcast.